Why did the elves sail west and leave Middle-earth? Did all of them leave, or did some stay? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. On this channel we cover great fantasy and science fiction books and TV shows, like The Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire, and The Witcher. Welcome. The elves leaving Middle-earth to sail west is a theme throughout The Lord of the Rings. We see some heading west early on in the movie trilogy, and right at the end of the books we see Elrond, Galadriel and more boarding the White Ship and sailing into the sunset. There are allusions everywhere to the fact that the time of the elves in Middle-earth is ending. It impacts on Arwen's romance with Aragorn, Galadriel's attitude to Frodo, and even Legolas. Yes, it's clear that the elves' time in Middle-earth is coming to an end by the time of The Lord of the Rings, and they feel a call to head west to the Undying Lands. But for an explanation of why those things are true, we need to delve deeper into the lore of Tolkien's Legendarium. Back in the mists of time, the elves woke in Middle-earth as the firstborn of the children of Ilúvatar. The secondborn, humans and other races, would come later, coming to life well before what we know as the First Age of Middle-earth, but still the eons after Arda itself came into being. And in case you haven't picked up on the nuance, Arda is the elvish name for the whole world, Middle-earth is the continent that we know best. For a while they wandered alone under the stars, the Valar being ignorant that they had even awoken, residing as they did in faraway Aman, the western continent. Melkor, Morgoth, the original big evil antagonist in Tolkien's Legendarium, discovered them, however, and started preying upon them. Elves disappeared and orcs started to appear. Ilúvatar's creation was being corrupted. When the Valar did discover what was going on, they prepared to wage war on Morgoth, and the Valar summoned the elves to Valinor in the west, where they wished to be in fellowship with them. And the elves responded, crossing the land and sea to go to Valinor. Or at least, many of them did. Some decided that they actually quite liked Middle-earth and wanted to stay, and others travelled some of the way and stopped off when they found somewhere they liked. This is the start of there being lots of different types of elves. We have the Avari, the unwilling, who rejected the summoning, the Teleri, who went some of the way but no more, the Noldor and Vanyar, who made it all the way to Valinor, though some of the Noldor later returned, and so on. I did a video breaking down the different kinds of elves properly if you're interested. For now, it's enough to know that the Valar summoned the elves over the sea to Aman, and some of them responded. Fast-forwarding quite a long time, Morgoth, who had been defeated by the Valar a bit after the elves appeared, was released from prison, stole the Silmarils and made off back to Middle-earth. A lot of the Noldor elves went after him to try to reclaim them. Eventually there was another war by the host of the Valar against Morgoth. He was defeated, and the Valar summoned the elves to head west for a second time, at the end of the First Age. Again, many followed the summons, but many more didn't. Yes, Silmarillion fans, that's skating very lightly over a lot of history, which we'll cover in other videos. At the time of writing this video, I also have a complete History of Middle-earth series in the works, so watch this space. But the important takeaway here is that the summons of the Valar to go west included an element of compulsion to it that we know as the sea longing, or the unquiet of Ulmo. Tolkien doesn't dwell on the mechanics of this, as it is more of a feeling than a clear-cut effect. In fact, although the sea longing worked in support of the summons, it seems more of a baked-in part of Tolkien's world. It didn't just affect elves, Tuor experienced it too. Actually, let's just take a look at the most famous example of what it felt like. Legolas. Legolas had been born and brought up in Middle-earth, a woodland elf without any particular connection to the sea. Then Galadriel prophesies in The Lord of the Rings that Legolas must beware the cry of a seagull, something he had never heard before. He later hears it, and we read this. "There," says Legolas, "I heard them crying in the air as we rode to the battle of the ships. Then I stood still, forgetting war in Middle-earth, for their wailing voices spoke to me of the sea. The sea! Alas, I have not yet beheld it, but deep in the hearts of all my kindred lies the sea longing, which it is perilous to stir. Alas for the gulls! No peace shall I have again under beech or under elm." From then on, Legolas yearns not for his forest home, but to journey west over the sea. He lingers for a while with Gimli and his elven king, but eventually he does head off in a boat westwards. So the elves were called there by the Valar, and there was this sea longing deep inside them, which wasn't just for the sea, but for the blessed realm that lay beyond the sea. And there's a deeper bit of lore here as well, to help us understand why the elves might want to abandon Middle-earth. It wasn't entirely against their will, you see, not just being summoned by powerful beings or following some urge deep inside them. Elves, as we know, are immortal, and the Eldar, those that had followed the original summons and dwelt in the Undying Lands in particular, had a need for incorruptibility and permanence deep in their souls. Middle-earth, for all its beauty and splendour, is mortal and changeable. Humans and dwarves live and die in the blink of an eye to the ageless elves. Empires grow and fall, even natural landscapes, rivers and trees change or die. And there is always the lingering threat of evil. The shadow, it never truly goes away, and all this change and death is wearing on immortal elves. In time, they grow weary, one by one, and the sea-longing grows in them. This weariness was held at bay by the elves in Lothlorien and Rivendell by the use of the Rings of Power held by Galadriel and Elrond. Galadriel herself had a personal ban from the Valar on returning west, which is a whole other story, but she is very aware that if the One Ring is destroyed, as it must be, then her own Ring of Power will lose its power, and Lothlorien will fade, and the elves who live there will leave. She says this to Frodo: "Do you not see now wherefore your coming is to us as the footsteps of doom? For if you fail, then we are laid bare to the enemy. Yet if you succeed, then our power is diminished, and Lothlorien will fade, and the tides of time will sweep it away. We must depart into the west, or dwindle to a rustic folk of dell and cave, slowly to forget and to be forgotten." Although the elves in Lothlorien and Rivendell had managed to avoid the wearying effects of staying in Middle-earth, most had not, and throughout the Second and Third Ages there was a steady trickle of elves heading west, and this trickle sometimes turned into a stream or river when the shadow fell most strongly across the continent, with whole cities and regions being abandoned. In the build-up to The Lord of the Rings, with Sauron flexing his evil muscles all over the place, the movement of elves westwards was noticeable even to the hobbits, secluded as they were. Sam mentions down in the pub that, "I've heard tell that elves are moving west. They do say they are going to the harbours, out away beyond the White Towers." Sam waved his arm vaguely. Neither he nor any of them knew how far it was to the sea, but it was an old tradition that away over there stood the grey havens, from which at times elven ships set sail, never to return. They are sailing, sailing, sailing over the sea. They are going into the west and leaving us. And after the War of the Ring was over, and the power of the Three Rings had waned, and Galadriel had received a pardon from the Valar, the elves went en masse to the west, to the extent that in the year 121 of the Fourth Age, we read that Arwen went to Lothlorien to find it completely empty and given over to nature. Middle-earth was no longer theirs. It was the dominion of man, and the magic that had kept pockets of it immune from the ravages of time and evil had gone. Other than a love for Middle-earth, there was nothing to stay for. We should probably acknowledge at this point that, as well as these quite fundamental drags on the elves westwards, there would have been more basic but no less powerful draws as well on individuals. Elrond's wife, and Galadriel's daughter, Celebrian, had gone to the Blessed Realm about 500 years before the events of The Lord of the Rings. Sailing to the west would mean reuniting with her, and all the other elves who had sailed west beforehand, or even those who had died in Middle-earth, and those who had never left the Blessed Realm. Much of Galadriel's family were still there, and as she was born there, it was home to her. Travelling west for the elves wasn't a matter of a journey into the unknown, it was a homecoming of sorts. That said, some elves simply didn't go west. Most of these seem to have been the descendants of those who rejected the Valar's first summons as well, so had never experienced the Undying Lands. For them, Middle-earth was home, whatever blessings may be elsewhere. What happened to them? Well, you'll remember Galadriel's vision of elves who lingered, dwindling to a rustic folk of dell and cave, slowly to forget and to be forgotten. This is indeed what happened. The Fourth Age of Middle-earth, that which followed the events of The Lord of the Rings, was known as the Dominion of Man. Humanity held sway, and the magical races and peoples slowly vanished into the mists of history. And for elves who lingered in Middle-earth into this time, that was actually their fate, to fade. Tolkien scholars debate the exact ins and outs of this, but it's clear that it was a thing. Elves who lingered too long in Middle-earth faded. Their bodies died or were consumed, but their disembodied spirits kept lingering, invisible to all save those they choose. Ghosts, almost, faded. Which is our final reason why some elves sailed west. A fear of fading. In a very fundamental sense, elves were made for the Blessed Realm. Those who refused to go might survive for a long time in Middle-earth, fending off the decay, but ultimately they would fade. Whereas those who answered the summons followed their sea longing or left to be reunited with family and friends long gone, found peace and unchanging blessings. When they sailed west, they found home. If you'd like to see more Lord of the Rings videos, please click on the link to my playlist on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.